Chief Nanya-Shaabu Eil, the Atsikota Nation of Yamasee Moors. Our nation is an internationally recognized Indigenous peoples organization. We're also a CSO, which is a civil society organization, and an NGO. What I have established is doing commercial processes whereby I exported the corporations called the United States, Canada, and Mexico to the middle of the Atlantic, which caused them to be registered in Scotland, then dissolved on the 21st of October 2012, and then re-registered in the City of London. I have claims on the British throne, an active claim against Elizabeth, the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family, the British throne, the British crown. I have an active lien on the Vatican that's effective for 30 years and then some, due to the fact that once they had released the Cheddar Man picture proving that what they called the original Briton was dark skin with dark curly hair and blue eyes, it proves that anyone with pale skin saying that they are royalty is a lie, because science recognizes pale skin as a genetic mutation, blue eyes as a genetic mutation. So all of what I'm telling you is already on file with the United Nations. And so it's not my opinion. The UN is already knowledgeable of what I'm telling you, plus the other 193 countries. So we have, I've done two UPR reports, which are called Universal Periodic Review Reports on the United States of America. I've done one on Trinidad and Tobago, and the inputs, questionnaires, and submissions that the United Nations wants from stakeholders. I have tendered that on behalf of our nation, and our nation is also a perpetual lien holder against the United States of America, which was authenticated by the U.S. State Department on May 21st, 2006. And so with that, I've claimed the planet back through a lodial title, which is on the blockchain on my OpenSea. And a lot of my claims are already on the blockchain, and I've have NFTs as well as tokens issued for those claims.
This is Muta Baruka. We want to present to you a wholesome kind of level of consciousness right now. So subscribe and tell your friend them. This is Muta Baruka.
I was born on what they call the city of Edmonton, which is north of Montana. They call it the Great White North. That's another nickname they have for it. I was born here. Now, finding out the history of this area, finding out that the city of Edmonton is actually on what's called Treaty 6 territory, which was a Cree nation. There's 54 Cree nations or 54 indigenous nations that encompass from the city of Edmonton, which is in the province of Alberta, going all the way to what's called Winnipeg, Manitoba. So I was born there, went to school here, went through the educational system here, and then moved out east to Ontario. And then from there, I moved to Georgia. And I lived in Georgia for about 7 years, 8 years. And living there, I learned more about Canada by being down there. And so what I ended up finding out was, because of the treaties that they had created with the so-called First Nations, those treaties meant that the city of Edmonton should not even be here as an Indian reservation. But because they have oil and bitumen and natural gas, of course, the mining companies want to come in. You have Fort McMurray, where they're oil sands, and they're extracting the oil from the sand and the dirt. That is the legacy. So upon learning that, that's when further examination, I found out that back in 1931, in what's called the Statute of Westminster, the provinces were already sovereign. They have not acted on it. So corporations with the misnomer, the province of Alberta, have taken over. And so it's corporate rule. What I also found out afterward was, and it's being revealed more and more these days, that the people calling themselves First Nations are not indigenous to here. They're from the Red Deer Caves in China. So they're Mongolian that migrated over through the Bering Strait into Alaska, south down into what's called BC, Alberta, Manitoba, and spread out from there. Yet we cannot find their bones going back more than 2,000 years, if you even get their bones to go back 100 or 500 years. So upon learning that, we also, amongst the so-called First Nations, they acknowledge that what they call Canada or North America is considered Great Turtle Island. Now, this puts what we have been taught in the school system in conflict with what you find anthropologically when you can find pictures of what they call the West Indians, who are dark skinned, dark curly hair. That's the Caribbean, South America. Now, the imagery and these old pictures do not match up with the people calling themselves American Indian, First Nation, or Aboriginal. So upon realizing that, I wrote Indian Affairs Canada and made this and my claim and my declaration that I am Indigenous. They wrote me back and acknowledged that because, of course, they're looking at a role being established and having a record. They said, we don't have a record of your family, but we do not dispute your Aboriginal ancestry. I said, that's all I need. I don't need anything else. So upon finding that out, not only are we indigenous to the West, we're also indigenous to the planet. It has been found out probably in the last 5 to 7 years. The Grand Canyon, they have found Egyptian hieroglyphs there. They found steles there, artifacts there, statues in the Grand Canyon. And what has happened is the US has sent the military in to cordon off an area of the Grand Canyon. They even have statues of Buddha there. So what that does is it throws off the narrative that Egypt was only in Africa. Egypt is here. You got the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois. You have the mounds in what's called Macon, Georgia. There's mounds there. You have the Mississippi mounds. You have the mounds in Ohio. You have the mounds. There's mounds out in California. Egypt was here in the West first. That's why the President Abraham Lincoln had coined the phrase Egypt of the West. So now, when we know that the Olmecs were first in what they call the Americas, then the Aztecs, then the Mayans, then the Incas, that means that not only were we first only in Africa prior to continental drift, there was no water going in between the continents, so it's easy to walk over and travel over. Now we find out we're indigenous to the West. So therefore, people who migrate from the Caribbean or from Africa and come to the West, they forsake their indigenous rights, their indigenous heritage to assimilate into a corporate system. And by default, they lose that heritage. Even though we're in the International Decade for People of African Descent, a lot of Pan-Africanists do not talk about that. This is the last year. So if you don't claim that you are part of the original mitochondria DNA, they call her Eve, we know her as Nikeba, from Ethiopia and the Kenya Pithecus bishopy in Kenya, then you are quote unquote black. You're outside of the civilitas mortuus. You're outside of the social society. They're just an object. And this is why they're not talking about the recognition, justice, and the development, because that was the theme from the United Nations. Because what happens is it throws everything in the system off in terms of saying, okay, well, everything began with Europe, and Europe was the Age of Enlightenment, and Europe brought civilization to the rest of the world. No, it was Egypt first. That's why they'll talk about Christianity, they'll talk about Islam, they'll talk about Judaism. But when it comes to ancient Egypt, they don't want to talk about that, because then that means you're the ancient Egyptian. That means you have ties to the people that created the pyramids, created civilizations, did eye operations, brain operations, chemistry, high math, algebra. I used to wear a war bonnet, and a lot of the First Nations up here used to get mad and called me a cultural vulture. And I said, well, I don't understand what's the problem. A war bonnet with the feathers represents the sun. The sun was Hiru. Hiru is what they call in Christianity as Jesus, and that's where they got their Trinity from, as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But the problem was they left out the mother, which was Aset. And so a lot of the religions, their origins come from Egypt. They end their prayers with the name Amen. That's Amen Ra. So why are they invoking or finishing up invocations with a deity from a different religion? Because they will see that it goes back thousands of years. And a lot of what is in Egypt has been fragmented into the Greeks with Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. So I wear this because I was already went through the indigenous. I'm already proven to the world I'm indigenous. Now, okay, they're upset at me wearing feathers. I said, good, you guys keep the feathers. I'll wear the namus. When I wear the namus, there is no question that I'm a descendant of the original Egyptians, the original people of the planet.
The informative information presented in this video is motivational and is positively aimed at inspiring, educating and entertaining the viewers with the cutting edge of critical reasoning. If you enjoy the contents on the Black Radar YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to show your support.
What has been found is back in Virginia, I'm not certain on the year, there was we call them Amorites, we don't call them Caucasians because we're actually the real Caucasians and we're actually the real Europeans, but that's another subject we'll get into later. What he did, the so-called white man did, was the original indigenous who were the Powhatan in Virginia, when they were doing their census, he changed their race with a stroke of a pen from Indian to black. And by doing that, as they are black, that's not a race. So that disowned them, disconnected them from any claims to the land. Then, being that black is not a race, a land, a language, a culture, a people, that made them subject to being captured. As they were captured, they put them on the ships in Virginia, sailed down the East Coast, and then came into the ports of either South Carolina, Georgia, and said, oh, here's the cargo we have of these African slaves. And then shave them, put oil on them, and then throw them up on a slave block and sell them so it looked like, oh, they actually came from Africa, when no, they were the original indigenous people that were here, who were dark-skinned, copper-colored, curly hair. And that's verified by Professor Rafinesque, who wrote a letter of 1828, if my memory serves correct, where he said that there was no red Indian of America. The only Indians were the dark skin, and they called them the black Indians, with dark curly hair, thick broad noses, thick lips, ugly, and their hair looked like it was crisp and burnt. Those are the original indigenous people. The people who call themselves American Indians and say that they are red, there never was red except for when they're doing ceremonies or going to war. That's the only time. So it's a lie. Because again, if all races are going to agree that life started in what they call as Africa, then how is it the people who are Mongoloid coming from Asia, how are they saying they're indigenous to Great Turtle Island, and they talk about stories of how they were here, but they don't have no anthropological scientific evidence to show that they were originally here? Yet, a so-called white DNA specialist, when they were debunking the DNA fraud about taking a swab and then, oh, we can match you up with an African tribe, they don't have enough DNA samples to match up, and that's BS. And this Amorite said it. The haplotype of the African American, and by default, that's also the Caribbean, is indigenous to here. So they already know, because they're taking blood samples when people go to the hospital, they check your file, they do all this background stuff that they don't tell them publicly. They already know you're indigenous to the West, not only the West, but also the planet. Right, so we're speaking English. Most people in the Caribbean, most people in the West who are black speak English primarily, unless they're second or third generation that their family came from another country and kept their language intact. You're speaking English. English is the language of your oppressor. So let's get that. Let's be clear about that. So you're not speaking your original language. Most people don't even know what their family's lineage is. So you're speaking the language of your oppressor. So your oppressor has already programmed you with his language. He didn't give you his language out of care and consideration or love. He gave it to you as a means of control, and then told you, use these words to describe yourself to me. Black is Old English, and that's from 740 years of the Christian era. So 740 years after the Jesus literary figure was created is when the word black came into existence. BL accent over the AC. That means pale, to glisten, to shine, to bleach. Now that's Old English. So it doesn't matter what we're saying in modern times. The etymology of the word black means pale. When the sun goes down, black people do not say it's black outside. When the sun goes down under the horizon, they say it's dark outside because dark means the absence of light. Black is to glisten, to shine, to bleach. That's why that reggae song, them a bleach, right? Y'all remember that song? Them a bleach up them skin, them a bleach. So why are these women bleaching their skin? Because the lighter color looks more beautiful. But that is, again, a genetic defect. Now, when we get into the commercial aspect in your contracts, black is considered in legal terms civilitas mortuus or civilitur mortuus, dead in the eyes of the law. Black has no definition in Black's Law Dictionary or Bouvier's dictionary. Black is considered outside of the body politic. Blacks are considered visible minorities, person of color, and a minority is a child. So this is why I don't know if I mentioned it in that video. You could be 30, 40 years old and an Amorite child or so-called a pale-skinned child, he could be 7 or 10 years old. You could tell him to do something as an authority, he'll disregard you because he's already raised subconsciously in their brain, oh, you're a descendant of a slave. I don't have to listen to nothing you got to say. So when they're reared like that, and then they get to being an adult, they're not listening to nothing that black people have to say. And they should not, because the word means pale. So Center for Disease Control, World Health Organization, ACRO, U.S. Department of Education all define black as a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. There are none. White is defined as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. So Europe is named after an Ethiopian princess. Her name was Europa. The Middle East is Northeast Africa. And of course, you know, North Africa is Africa. So that's all niggers. And niggers is a title of nobility. It is not a derogatory term. That connects to your kundalini energy. That's why they don't want you saying it, because as you start chanting the word, you raise your kundalini energy, that starts going up your spine. You all start heating the planet up because we're in the sun cycle. And now people are becoming more aware of their history and the spell of Kingu, which is the spell of ignorance that has been put on us. Now, American Indian and Alaska Native is defined as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of North and South America, which includes Central America and the Caribbean by default, by extension rather, and who maintains cultural identification through tribal affiliation or community attachment. Now, my lineage is from what they call Trinidad and Tobago. Kaire is the original name. And I noticed with Carnival used to be very cultural, and then it got to very scanty. And then in the last 10 years, it has become very aware where people are now wearing feathers and dressing up as West Indian. And I found that interesting. I said, why are they wearing feathers now? So, oh, wow, they're waking up. When I was born, our parents always said, you're West Indian. They never went into no further detail other than to say, you're West Indian. Knowing what I know now I understand why they said that. We are the original peoples, whether not only of the West, but the world. But in the West, we are West Indian. So we're not black. So they didn't associate with the word black. Black is a slave brand. Furthermore, African American, which is connected to black, is a patented meat and processed food. So your viewers and listeners can look up African American. They can go into Google and type African American patented meat and processed food. So when they say the words African American or they say the word black, what they're saying is they are food. So then the entities out there masquerading as humans along with their human workers are saying, oh, there's some food here that we can kidnap and then the person disappears. So you can't use the word black. I have challenged every black scholar out there. Mutabaruka, I've challenged all these black intellectuals, black legal intellectuals, to defend the word black. Justify why you call yourself black or Afro-Caribbean or Afro-centric or Pan-Africanist like Umar Johnson. They all stay quiet. And I said, yes, I know why. Because now, how are you an educator and you don't have a full command of the English language of your oppressor, where when you say the word black, which means pale, they're the black people. You're white. And we're not talking about skin color. We're talking about caste system. Commercial, global caste system that has been put out globally. So it doesn't matter if it's in Jamaica, Trinidad, it don't matter if it's Antigua. These corporations are everywhere. They're called transnational. And so they are using the terms and conditions and the criteria of how they're going to define race. Now, after they've led the witness or the person to say a word that is incorrect, they step back and now it's five monkeys. So the next black person that sees somebody that looks like them, oh, you're not so-and-so, you're black like us. Now the slaves will enslave each other off the original programming spell protocol. And then the person who initiated gets to step back. Well, I gave them the definitions and told them they could self-identify, and they still want to identify as black. Great. So now we damage them. So when black people go to court for court issues, they're at the mercy of the administrator. It doesn't matter if the administrator is a Caribbean, if they're from the islands, if they're black, it makes no difference because they've all been trained that black has no standing at law. And that fact was revealed by President Barack Obama on the Tom Joyner Morning Show. So when he said that, you're supposed to drop the word black at all. You can use the word carbon. You could use Nuboon. If you know you're Carib or Garifuna or Arawak or Yamasee or Cherokee, you can use all of those, any one of those, because those are definable. You can go to a museum and see the history of those indigenous peoples, the Taino, the Arawak, the Carib. You can find information and artifacts. You can't find no artifacts on black people. That's a game. Cruel game as it is. Yes, white is known as purity. This is called the Uraeus. This is what the Aferti, which are known as the pharaohs in ancient Egypt, wore, and it symbolized that the third eye was open. Mm-hmm. You have people who are pale that go and will mimic and wear Egyptian attire. You got the Arabs over in Egypt who really aren't the ancient Egyptians. They're not niggers. And we have a woman, a Tocton white female on our webinar, because I teach black people how to change their status, claim their indigenous heritage, and then prove they are not lost at sea, because you're talking about a global slave system. So they're looking at the original foundational contract. Now, they're not going to tell our parents. They didn't tell us. Our parents just went along with it. So under maritime law, even if somebody makes a fraudulent claim against you, if you do not rebut that, then it stands under maritime law. So she told us that she used to live in Aswan in Egypt, and the Arabs would come up to her. She was teaching, and they would come up to her and tell her, teach our children that they're the ancient Egyptians, even though that we know they're not. So the Arabs know they are not us. They're not the original. It's a tourism industry. It's an economic windfall, because my first thought was, okay, how come they are worshiping Allah, which is an Islamic religion, which was created by the Jesuits, which the Jesuits admit to. One of the Jesuit priests admitted that they created Islam as a competition against Christianity, because Christianity was a competition against Judaism. And that's where you watch the documentary called Caesar's Messiah, which is the whole documentary is on YouTube for free. So they created Christianity, then they created Islam. So I said, well, why aren't they dressed like the ancient Egyptians? They worship Allah. So therefore, if they're not worshiping or giving knowledge to Amun or Asaru or to Nebthed or Aset or any of the Nitru or the Ogdoad, that means that they are actually the invaders in Egypt, and they pushed our ancestors that were up near Cairo down into Aswan. The people who are in Aswan, I've seen the documentaries, and they keep crocodiles as pets. And they had an Arab sit between them because they're still thinking he's a descendant, but he's sitting in between two men who are Aswan, and they're speaking to each other in their language. He's sitting in between them, and they're asking him, what are they saying? He said, I have no idea what they're saying. So then the question comes in, how are they accurately deciphering the hieroglyphs on the walls when they don't know the language? They start off at Seti the first, because Seti the first was a Hyksos. That's when the Hyksos, the shepherd kings, came into Egypt. So they like to talk about him. They don't even talk about Ramesses II anymore, because Ramesses II is a nigger. Seti the first is Hyksos, Hyksos kings, mixed genes. So they'll like that because they can sell that. So I have adopted this because I said, this is who I'm honoring. I know who I am. I know I am an ancient Egyptian today. That's who I am. I will show others how to get off of that slave contract, get rid of the contract. There's the case specifically for people in the Caribbean called Regina versus Ja. And that case proved that Elizabeth was never coronated. She didn't have the Stone of Destiny. And because of that, anything that's done in her name is fraudulent and can be challenged. And so now when they put the Cheddar Man picture along with that case together, it has to be that the people who are the original descendants of the mitochondria DNA Eve, that they have to come forward, and they cannot use Black, African American person of color. They can't use Jamaican. They can't use Antiguan, because all of those are corporate names. If you do any study, you'll know Jamaica's original name was Jamaica. Then you'll have Kyrie for Trinidad. You'll have Guadalati for Antigua. Then you start seeing, okay, they're taking the language, scrambling it, giving it to people as a new program. People are accepting the program, ignoring the principles of origin and the principles of etymology. So at a certain point, I give when all the people that I teach on my webinar that I have on Mondays, I tell them 5 minutes. If the person can't handle that, then you move on, talk about some mundane, boring stuff, because you see they're not elevated, they're not ready. And a lot of them, you can see in their eyes. The ones who say they're the most conscious are the ones who are I call them the actors and the artists. They're not serious. They want to be an exotic Negro on the plantation. We spoke with the black guy who wrote the script for Avatar. We spoke with him because he was suing James Cameron. When he has all his receipts to show he had the script, the registered mail, everything. The moment he filed it, that's when James Cameron stopped the production. That was a $200 million production. That's why it took so long for Avatar 2 to get released. We told him, listen, you got to change your race and ethnicity. We'll show you how to do it, but you're not going to win that case being Black or African American. I still have constitutional rights. I said, listen, man, you're going into federal court. There's yellow fringes around the flag. Constitution is suspended. You have no standing at law. You got to get white. That's the key. He didn't want to listen, and we were sending complaints over to the UN, to the Office of the High Commissioner at the time, which was Zaid Al-Hussein, who's also the Prince of Jordan. So when we sent that over to him, he didn't. That guy the black guy who wrote the Avatar script, his complaint could have been in there, and that would have created a precedent. So what happens is, first we're screening. So you have to do a video showing you have not taken the jab. If you've taken the PCR test, you can still do it because you can do a declaration against a fraud against the testing company. The legal maxim is black has no standing at law. So therefore, by default, nobody on this planet, no corporation should be doing business with black people, because the principles of contract law, both parties have to have equality in contract. True? They want the money. Okay, you want cell phone service, or you want this service, or you're filing a lawsuit. They want the money from you. They'll take the money. They're not going to say no, because the money is energy to them. But what is going to happen is they'll give you 200 or give you 100. If you spent 3,000 on a lawyer, they'll give you $2,000 worth of legal fees. Okay, his 2,000 is up, or his 3,000 is up. That's it. And then now I rule against you, even though you have all your evidence, all your facts, and everything. So that's one of the things that I've been bringing up at the UN Working Group of Experts for People of African Descent, where I said, okay, now I need to know who on this committee is an attorney. Because if you're a black attorney sitting on the bench, you are in a conflict of interest, because you have to get called to the bar. And specifically for those in the Caribbean, they go into London to the Inns of Court to get trained or get called at a satellite in the Caribbean. So their first obligation is to the court, not to the client. Their first obligation is to the British accredited registry, not to black people, not to people of African descent, Africans of the diaspora. That means their contract is fraud, and they are conducting fraud. Benjamin Crump, he changed his race to white, and we know because we got the screenshots, because I was on the same meeting for the Working Group of Experts for People of African Descent, and he was a keynote speaker that day. I was so grateful that I got to speak after him. So after I got to do my speech, and I have that recorded, which we're going to put that back up on the blockchain so people can look at it. This is the problem. You have your black people who are professionals, case in point, your black lawyers. Then you have another issue. They are also part of the Boule. They're part of secret societies, what they call the Nine Eyes. That's a problem, because then they come out saying we got to help our people, but you're not telling your people that they're not black. That's the starting point. Everything else after that is called fruit of a poisonous tree. The foundation is built on sand. Doesn't matter how strong your building is, I can come push it over with my hands because you built it on sand. It'll fall. So this is the great mystery, the great truth. And I thank Barack Obama, Barry Soetoro, that's his real name. I appreciate him telling that he does not consider himself the first black president, because the word black has no standing at law. Byron Allen, who was suing Comcast, he was suing two companies. Comcast was the one that they lost on appeal, and they took him to Supreme Court for the United States. I did an interview on an independent radio station in New Jersey. They tried to get in touch with Byron Allen to discuss that case, give him publicity, but at the same time saying you're not going to win that case because black has no standing at law. They couldn't get in touch with him, and he lost the case. And what they used was the 1865 Civil Rights Act, which is for black people, but they used it against him because the bar it has to be, in order to get remedy, it has to be that it's 100% that you are black, which is the reason why he couldn't get the TV station licensing. Then Ice Cube was the next one who did contract with Black America, and I called Ice Cube out and said, this is fraud. How are you contracting with people that have no standing at law like you're going to help them? That's a lie. I put it right there on his channel. He ain't said nothing. I got interviewed by 97.3, I think it's called Hot 97.3 in Chicago, Illinois, and I explained that situation to them. The bigger question, Mr. Radican, is this. You now have to really impress not only on your audience, but black people in general. Now, do you all really want freedom, liberation, if that's the way you want to define it? Or do you guys just want to have the pressure of bondage lifted a little, but I'll still stay on the plantation and serve massa? This is where we're at, because when I've spoken with David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, showed him how to get white. He couldn't say whether he did or not. And I said, oh, I forgot. He signed a contract with the Jews. So since he's trying to sell books, he ain't trying to get free. Dr. Cress Welsing, she got the information on that, was asked the question, why are we still calling ourselves black? And she starts squirming in her chair. So then I realized these black people, Angela Davis, Nikki Giovanni, who's the other one? Cornel West refused to sign a letter of endorsement. These black leaders are puppets. What you're going to have is standing at law. It's fraud. The system is built on siphoning the energy, and I'm just talking for black people right now. They're doing it for everybody, but for black people, they're siphoning energy off of people that, based on their law, cannot contract. So if two parties have to have what? Equality under the law, correct? You cannot establish a contract with somebody that's a minor. They'll tell you have to have, that minor has to have either a guardian, or unless they're the age of consent. If not, they have to have a guardian to sign on their behalf, because they said they are not at the age of majority. They do not have the capacity to understand the terms, the ramifications of signing a contract, correct? So the problem is, the reverse statement of black has no standing at law is no corporation, nobody, no court, no city is supposed to be contracting with them, African American, Afro-Caribbean, whatever, because if there's a dispute or a controversy and it has to go into the court, the vessel, there's going to be they will be at a disadvantage. The other contracting party is going to have a superior advantage. And that right there is fraud. That gives the other party the grounds to dishonor the contract established with black people. That's what happened with Byron Allen. That's what happened with the guy from Avatar, even Sophia Stewart, who I spoke with, who wrote The Matrix. I told her the same thing. And I said, listen, you have to get white. So we're screening people first. They got to come on my webinar. You send me an email to my email address, and you have to do a video to show you're not magnetized and you didn't take the jab. That's what we're doing first, because of the advent of the nanotechnology now. So now we're screening people first. Once they're screened, then they can come on. They'll get the caveat, the white time screensaver. And again, it's a new skill set. So you have to be taught, because black is already embedded in your cells. So if a person's been calling themselves black for 30 plus years, that's already the frequency is in their cells. So to shake that and to change that and transmutate that, you need a guide. I am the white one. I am the guide to show you how to start implementing that. And you said the magic word before I got to say it, which is fabulous. The three magic words for the change are I am white. And then memorize the definition of white. You don't give your opinion. You say, hey, this is the U.S. Department of Education. This is the Center for Disease Control. This is ACRO. These are international organizations who all agree the definition for white is a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Black has the definition is a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. So I challenge any black intellectual, any black scholar, any black professor, please name me a black racial group of Africa, and I'll debate them on defending black. So far, there's been no takers on this planet.
The informative information presented in this video is motivational and is positively aimed at inspiring, educating and entertaining the viewers with the cutting edge of critical reasoning. If you enjoy the contents on the Black Radar YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to show your support.